Hello, Jessica. Happy Friday. How you doing?
I'm great. Happy Friday to you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I am super excited this week to introduce you to our audience and to introduce our audience to you because we're here to talk about beating burnout, how you can get unstuck when things are difficult at work and it's starting to impact your health, well-being, and potentially, other areas of your personal life. So I'm going to get Jessica introduced as people are joining. Please know that you are welcome to incorporate comments. We would love to take your questions. Beating burnout is our topic this week, but as always, we're going to be accepting any general career questions that you might have and provide some advice this afternoon. So to get us started, I am going to make sure everyone is in the right place. So for most of us here that know Jess and I and have worked with us in the past, this is probably going to resonate with you. If you are a 6 or 7 earning executive or rising professional, you're in the right place. If you are sick of getting passed up for promotions that you know you've earned, or you're no longer willing to work in a toxic work environment, and you're dedicated to sharing your talents and experience the world, you are in the right place. And if you are here because you're feeling burnout or stressed or anxious or depressed because of what's going on in the workplace and you need support where you're looking for some advice and guidance, you have come to the right place. For those of you who may not already know who I am, I'm a professional resume writer and career coach and the founder of Quirk. It's a boutique firm that offers personal branding and career consulting services. I pride myself on being a partner to women executives and rising professionals, and I always promote authenticity as a vessel for success. Lastly, on a personal note, some of you may not know I'm an ADHD and mental health advocate, a voice for minorities. I'm a big fan of mid-century modern furniture, and I'm also a single mom. So I know some of you can relate to some of my interests too. And if you can, please do connect with me via LinkedIn. I love making new friends. Jessica, I am super excited that you are here to talk about beating burnout. Jessica is a wonderful career coach and therapist. She's going to have some great tips to share with us. I would love for you to take just a moment and share with the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as you said, I'm a career coach and therapist, and I work with folks that are in midlife. So 40 plus, who are in leadership roles, and who are feeling some kind of intersection between emotions, mindset, and their career, because as we all know, it's not just the nuts and bolts. It's not just the how do I write my resume, or how do I make my LinkedIn profile look good. It's also this kind of stuff that really impacts what we achieve, how we feel, all of that. So that's who I work with. That's what I do.
Excellent. Well, we are so pleased to have you here. I was so excited when you and I connected maybe a month or so ago, and I didn't realize we had so much in common. So I'm super excited that you're here. So burnout is so prolific and prevalent today that the World Health Organization has actually defined it as a syndrome that's conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed, right? That's the key here, I think. It's everyone is going to have some type of stress in their personal life and their professional life, right? But when it's not successfully managed, that's when stress becomes a real problem. Jessica, this is really, kind of a hard, medical definition almost of burnout. How else would you characterize what burnout is, maybe more in layman's terms, or what you're seeing from a perspective of your clients?
Yeah. So actually, people that talk and write about burnout are careful to say that it's actually not a medical or mental health diagnosis. So, but it is a it's an emotional and physical result of stress, right? So you're gonna feel it emotionally, you're gonna feel it physically, and it's something that progresses over time. So there's different stages of it. So in the beginning, you will feel one way, and at the end, it's like total collapse, right? Like, so there's a range of it, and you can also be somewhere in the middle, right? So not everybody who says, I'm burned out is experiencing the same thing at the same time.
Interesting. And, I want to go back to a point you just made about there being different phases or stages. I thought that was really interesting. And for you that have joined us, Jessica has a really, really great resource that she's going to share with everyone. And I've had a chance to kind of look through it. And I noticed one of the resources actually describes the stages of burnout. So maybe you can tell us, what does it look like on the onset when, it's just starting to creep up on you? What does it look like when you're, there's 12 stages. So maybe when you're in 6 or 7, what does that look like versus, man, shit's hit the fan and now I am fully burnt out. This is not working for anymore. What does that look like?
Yeah. So in the beginning, it does feel like stress. It feels like stress that you're not managing. It feels like overwhelm, right? I think overwhelm is a really good term because it does indicate that you're not managing it, right? That it's taking over. So that's kind of the beginning. In the middle, you start to see some physical impacts. And you also, so those physical impacts could be not sleeping. You're probably also, especially if you're prone to it, you're probably also going to see anxiety, which is an interesting thing because that is both a feeling and a kind of a physical thing as well, because you might have heart palpitations, you might have, things like that. The thing that starts to creep on that I think is really different, and that progresses, that you don't really truly see in the beginning, is this feeling of emptiness and meaninglessness and depersonalization. So it's like you don't give a hoot anymore, right? About work, about the customers necessarily, about the people you're working with. Like, it doesn't matter. And then as that gets worse, right, towards the end, towards the collapse, everything's worse. So the physical is worse. And it literally is collapse. Like, it could and probably would at that point require mental health intervention, physical health intervention. And you're at this point emotionally where nothing matters, right? Like, it's real deep kind of depression from a kind of an existential point of view, right? You just emotionally, nothing matters, not just work. So that's where people can get with burnout and why it's so dangerous.
Yeah, I was just going to say, those are all really serious things that if this is, left to go run rampant on its own, that you can really find yourself in a serious situation. I have battled with depression and anxiety throughout my life. And when I've experienced workplace burnout, man, it just exacerbated it so much. And in fact, you and I were chatting before we jumped on about a personal experience of mine having workplace burnout. One of my corporate jobs, I wasn't well suited for the role and I knew it. But at the same time, my marriage was falling apart and I needed to have a job and I needed to be even thinking about what's my next step so that I can, move on with my life. And I mean, I spent a lot of mornings literally before work in my car crying, to the point that one morning the director of operations actually came out and was like, "Are you okay?" Like, that's how bad it got. I gained about 30 pounds. I stopped enjoying working out. My relationships with my friends really faltered because I didn't want to do anything. And when they did talk, I was kind of negative about things. And it really does, take over. And when you don't have an easy solution, or maybe not even an easy solution, when there's not an obvious solution right off the bat, you can start to feel really hopeless. So I know that there are probably some folks out there who have experienced something like that, and can relate. And if you are, just know that, I know how you feel and there are ways to overcome it. There are solutions to that. And Jessica and I are going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And, in case you're wondering, I did end up leaving the job, but I was telling Jessica the way that I left it. This is how bad it got, folks. And this is why you want to address these things before they get too bad. I got to the point where I was put on a plan. And I also ended up one day, just my toxic boss said something to me and it just set me off. I went out to my car at lunchtime, sat in the parking lot, wrote my letter of resignation, sent it while I still had Wi-Fi in the parking lot, and went home. And there's a little bit more of the story. It smoothed over and it was an okay situation, but it could have been a lot smoother than that had I been able to cope with the stress, cope with the anxiety. And I understand like the physiological effects, right, of stress can have on you, that fatigue. For me, anxiety feels like it can be heart palpitations, but it can also feel like someone's sitting on my chest. So, be conscientious of how your body feels, what it's telling you, because those signs are really important and can be indicative of other serious things. So moving on, we talked a little bit about symptoms, right? I shared a few of mine, but generally it's low energy, right? Exhaustion. And Jessica, you mentioned earlier, or maybe to this, it might be similar, like just feeling a sense of complacency where you don't feel as invested in your job. What else would you say that your clients or those that you've talked to are experiencing in terms of signs and symptoms?
Yeah, I think related to that loss of motivation and the apathy towards work is also this feeling of not being able to do anything that matters at work, right? Like the work that you're doing not only doesn't make an impact or is not meaningful, but also like you don't you can't make any progress, like whatever, like it doesn't even matter if you show up because it's just like you're just treading water, right? So it just feels very pointless to do anything.
Yeah.
So
I felt like that for sure. I mean, the thing is, I would stay late. I felt like I was working really hard, and I felt like, there's something wrong with me. Not maybe there's something wrong with the situation or the conditions or the stress in my life. It was, I just need to soldier on through this. It'll get better. It's kind of one of those toughen up, whatever doesn't break you makes you stronger. Well, I don't know that that's necessarily the case with some of these situations. But I think the loss of motivation, goes hand in hand when you have that much stress and anxiety, you start to feel depressed. It is very difficult to even motivate yourself to do simple things to function throughout the day, let alone perform in your work. And then, of course, then you have the added challenges, right, of symptoms in terms of how it impacts your relationships, right? Because I'm sure a few stages in to burnout, people start to notice, right? What would you say that becomes evident to others, right? Or not so much?
You were describing your story. I mean, you talked about the feelings of depression and anxiety. So people definitely can notice that. And then the different ways that people cope with it. So overworking is one thing, the negative feeling. So you said you were negative with your friends, didn't want to do anything. So that apathy, all of those things where you just are completely in a rut. People definitely will notice that. The other thing that happens is people get angry, right? Like this is a terrible situation and it feels like you're trapped. And so it sometimes feels easier to get angry at the people that are closest to you and that you love the most than it does to get angry at the situation, which you have no power over, it feels like, or your boss, which you can't really yell at maybe. So you go home and you yell at your spouse or you yell at the kids or whatever, and people notice that. So it's like your whole life gets swirled around and then, obviously you don't feel good about that. You don't feel good about any of those things.
Yeah.
Dan says, I'm allowed to be angry, question mark, in the comments. And yeah,
I say yes.
I would
Yeah.
say absolutely. The feeling is okay, but you have to make
Yeah.
choices about how you, my wife is about how you handle that feeling and what you do with it. So yeah.
Agree. Yeah, there are healthy ways to deal with anger and not so healthy ways to deal with anger. I will acknowledge that my ways of dealing with anger and frustration were not necessarily so healthy. Um, so yeah, and you know what? I know I'm not the only one. In fact, I actually pulled a few stats to share with you just how prevalent this is.
Mm-hmm.
So 40%, this is in a study of about 1,000 workers, over 40% of them reported experiencing workplace burnout. So almost half, right? Interestingly enough, 46% of women reported higher levels of burnout than men. I don't know if they do that on a sliding scale. They gauge, how burned out you are. Maybe it's from a level of symptoms. But the interesting thing is that the findings are that women are being impacted a bit more than men in terms of the level of burnout that they're experiencing. There was another study that was done just earlier this year that found that 86% of women that were surveyed felt more stressed or just as stressed as they did last year. So what that tells us, right, is that things aren't getting better. And people are even saying now that their mental health is suffering because of job burnout. Mm-hmm. What do you say? Do these stats sound about right to you? Do they see them on the low side, on the high side? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a way to gauge about whether they're low or high. If I had to guess, I would say they're probably low. Because I would say that people tend to underreport things that are negative or that they don't feel good about talking about. But these are the stats that we have to work with, and they're kind of horrifying if you look at them. And I think that it's not just work that is, I mean, they're talking about workplace burnout. These are the stats on workplace burnout, but I think there are other factors that probably contribute, like, COVID obviously is a huge stressor. How people divide up the childcare and the workplace, the home, the household tasks is another potential factor. And then factors related to women and work, like the pay gap and that sort of thing. So, I mean, there's probably a lot of stuff that's being reflected here. I'd have to really look at the studies and how they did it. But to your point, people are really stressed. It's not getting better, and we need to do something.
Well, and you and I were talking about this right before we started, right? We were talking about just the clients that we work with. I primarily work with women, so more of my, anecdotal stories involve women. But I would say at this point, 70 to 80% of the clients that I work with describe some pretty significant level of workplace stress. Disinterest, feeling like what they're doing doesn't matter, feeling like it's affecting the way that they cope with things at home and their relationships. A lot of people, and this was the case for me, right? I said I gained 30 pounds. I was eating terribly. It wasn't working out. I'm seeing that a lot of people fall into that same trap, right? Food, alcohol, whatever your vice is, it's really easy to self-medicate. And I fell into that trap too. So it's like, how can you figure out what ways to alleviate the stress at work? And, it's interesting because this is kind of off the topic. It just came up in my mind, is that I think there's a systemic problem with leadership, because a lot of the complaints that I'm getting from my clients have to do with leadership. Their boss is either unavailable, or when they are available, they're not a nice person, or they don't give them opportunities to grow or develop themselves, or their ideas are squashed. So, right, you get hired into a position. Yes, you're going to be able to be strategic. You're going to have some decision-making capabilities, and you get into the role, and my clients are like, okay, I have this idea. Let's do this. Or they want to do what they were actually hired on to do, and their boss is like, well, yeah, I don't have time for that on my plate. We're going we're going to have to put it on the back burner until next quarter when you've just spent all of Q1 working on that, right? So I think a lot of it stems back to people managers not being good people leaders. And when you when you work under that kind of leadership, especially knowing when you have something more to give, right, or that you have skills that are not being employed, it's very easy to get burned out quickly.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, we've all heard people leave bosses, not jobs, right? And I think that that's very true. People feel that their
You
work is.
know, I'm curious, Jessica, like of people listening, if you want to throw in the comments, like, have you
Yeah.
ever experienced burnout? Like, I'm curious, like, what are we doing here? We can do our own study.
Yes, we can. Yes, we
Might be
can.
a smaller pool, but if you're listening in, drop in the comments. We'd love
Yeah,
to
I'm
hear
really
if you've
interested.
experienced it. And then also, this is a good chance or good opportunity to say again, you are welcome to post in the comment section any general career questions. Right now, a lot of my clients are concerned about interview prep, knowing how to answer, tell me about yourself, being able to answer why. Here's one of the things that my clients are facing right now is, I've been in my job for 20 years, the same company. How do I explain why I'm leaving now and why I'm the right fit for this job? So if you have some general career questions, feel free to pop them in the comments and Jessica and I will be happy to address them. We are very curious to know if you've experienced burnout. So, please feel free to share that in the comments. You don't have to give us details. Like, this isn't a tell-all here, but if you want to share your experience or that you've had one, please do. Dan mentions dumb interview questions. Yes, there are a lot of seemingly, well, not even seemingly, there are a lot of dumb interview questions.
Yes, there are.
If you have any questions that you want to know how to field, or if you've gotten a dumb question, you want to know how should I have handled this next time, then feel free to drop those in the comments. So we've looked over some stats. It's definitely a problem. Let's talk about some things that we can do. I'm going to put us back on big camera. And we're going to roll this way for the rest of our show until toward the very end. This way, I feel like I can see you a little bit better. I like you on the bigger screen.
You're
I feel
beautiful.
like we're more like,
Yes.
thanks. I feel like we're more like in the same room now. This just feels more natural. So, okay. So we know what I did to cope with burnout, which is the no-nos. Okay. I mean, I did eventually go to the good things and I can share some of those things, but I'm curious, in your professional opinion, what are the things that I should have been doing to take better care of myself, to be a better person, to be a better partner, mother, etc., to get myself healthy again?
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple things, and I'm going to actually back up for a minute because it's interesting that the more information you have, the better you can take care of yourself. And so there's research done that talks about why people actually burn out at work, and in the burnout recovery kit that people can get their hands on if they want to. I go over all of those different reasons, but if you can kind of look and see, like, what is the mismatch between you and your workplace, then you can, if you're in a workplace currently where you're burning out, then you can at least see, like, what are these reasons? So if it is like, like I am not having the opportunities that I want, or I'm not getting the recognition that I'm looking for, right? And it might be a combination of multiple factors, but there are some different themes. There are actually 6 different themes. You can pinpoint what some of those things are, and then you can actually kind of plot out a plan to maybe rectify those. And if you can't rectify them in your current employment situation, you at least have a roadmap for what you need in the next employment situation. I need a place where they do recognize employees. And I'm going to ask those questions on my informational interviews and on my real interviews. When I go on interviews, I'm going to ask them how they do recognize employees and what that looks like. So it can give you a little bit of a roadmap. So that's one thing, is to really just understand how and why you're burning out, and create that map. The other thing is self-care. Everybody talks about self-care. That's a component of it, and it is important throughout those 12 steps that we talked about, right? In the beginning, it's gonna give you higher leverage, right? As you burn out more and more and more, the self-care things that you can do are less and less impactful. You're kind of further down the road, and so you're going to need a bigger guns, if you will.
Yeah.
And so you may get to the point where you need to leave a situation, and that's what it looks like. And so I wouldn't actually call your situation a no. I would say it maybe was what you needed to preserve your emotional health at the time. And then you navigated the fallout of that situation, and look, here you are.
Yeah.
And you're better. So good.
Ta-da!
For you. Yeah, exactly. So I would say, like, you want to match your what to do strategies based on kind of where you are in those steps.
Oh, that makes sense, right? To figure out what level of care or attention you really need to give to it, based on wherever you're at the beginning stage versus toward the end. Like you were to your earlier point, when you've gone to 10, 11, 12 stage, then you're looking at needing to bring out heavier artillery to really handle those things. To your earlier point about sort of listing out, what it was that was causing burnout in the first place. When I did get my act together, one of the exercises that I did, and I have done several times since, is it's called like a clarity contrast or contrast clarity exercise. And you're basically listing out, these are the things that are a problem for me, right? I'm working in an environment where it's unhealthy. So in my next job, to clarify, I want a job where I can work normal hours, or I'm looking for a job that will allow me to work remotely. So it's kind of like listing out what the things that are the problems, and then reframing it and saying, okay, these are the things that I need now in the future. So another a tool to use. And I put up on the banner for everyone listening in, we put the link for the burnout recovery kit that Jessica's put together. I have personally looked through it. I've got it right here. There is some fantastic information. There's links in here, assessments, worksheets. It's really, I really wish I had something like this. And actually, when Jessica told me that she was going to be offering it to you guys, I was like, ooh, will you just please send it to me? Like, I'm curious to see, what did I miss? What should I do next time? And I think I think that it's also worth noting that even if you're not a corporate employee, you don't have a traditional job. Let's say you're an entrepreneur or a freelancer or gig economy worker, workplace burnout is still a thing, right? It doesn't have to be burnout resulting from a physical workplace, right? It could be, well, I guess I'm asking you, I was saying it in a rhetorical way, but is it more like, what am I trying to say? Do you know what I'm trying to say? I'm asking you to read my mind, Jessica.
I think I do know what you're saying. Like, can you burn out if you're working remote and not?
Oh, yeah. So like, burnout can still happen even if you're remote, right? It's not necessarily the environment, like the physical environment. It could be the situation, right? It could be the context of your workplace. I guess that's what I was trying to clarify, because, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, I mean, I've absolutely experienced burnout. So if you're joining and you're a business owner, or you're looking to become a business owner, leaving the corporate world is not necessarily the way to like leave workplace burnout behind. I guess that's the moral of the story. Although I have found as a business owner and entrepreneur that I am able to take control of my work environment, of who I associate myself with colleague wise, and also with my clients. I get to choose who I surround myself with. And for me, that was one of the ways that I eventually or ultimately dealt with my workplace burnout, was to really sit down and take a look at my life and write out, what do I want my life to look like? And I meant down to Okay, I wake up at 7:30 a.m. I take my daughter to summer camp. I go ride my bike for half an hour. Then I take a dip in the pool. Then I'm in a job search, or I'm going to do, whatever. I'm going to prospect for new clients. I laid out what I want my life to look like, and then, kind of worked backwards from there. And I realized after one more job and then giving it some more thought that for me, it was going to be creating the type of job that I needed to make use of my talents, but also accommodate the fact that I have ADHD and I'm productive at certain times of the day more than others, or that I need a quiet workspace to work in. For me to have all those tools and resources that I personally needed, I needed to leave my job. But that doesn't mean I don't still experience burnout. So I think the things that we're talking about, or going to be talking about in terms of alleviating that pain, can really be applied regardless of whether you're working in a corporate setting or whether you're working for yourself or even in a very small startup setting. So I think it's important to make that distinction. So, if you are working for yourself and you're feeling burnout, you're totally justified. It's a thing. So let's talk more about, things that you could do. Let's just say early on, right? We can sort of go in order.
Mhm.
Maybe you're just starting to recognize, a little bit of fatigue. Maybe you're just losing a little interest. Maybe you used to, volunteer to take on the new project, and now you're like kind of shy away from new projects or whatever. What might someone do who's starting to feel the inkling of burnout? What might they do to try to alleviate that?
Yeah. So again, I would kind of notice who you are and what you tend to do that drives the burnout. So are you somebody that tends to overwork? Are you somebody that tends to not have great boundaries, and you are the one that always raises their hand? Um, so there might be different things. Are you in a role that, maybe like even when you started, or maybe it evolved, that you like don't really care about what you're doing just in general, like this is just a job to you, and you kind of knew that.
Yeah.
And now you're really feeling burned out about that situation. So kind of depending on like what you're feeling, you might say, wow, I really notice myself like raising my hand all the time, just taking on too much stuff. I am going to decide that there's enough on my plate right now, and I'm going to start saying no, right? And that might be true for work things, and it might also be true for home things. Like there might be a very
Mm.
high bar for what you choose to kind of let into that circle for a period of time until you start to feel better, right? It might be that you choose to leave at 5 o'clock every day. I had a client who came to me. She was nearing retirement, and she
Mhm.
worked 70-hour weeks. And yes, and I talked to her about what would happen if she just logged off. She was remote. What would happen if she logged off at 5 o'clock every day?
Mm.
And she was very nervous about it. She kind of didn't
Mm.
know what would happen if she logged off at 5.
Yeah.
Um, And eventually we got to the point where she was willing to kind of experiment with it. And
Mhm.
lo and behold, the world didn't end. Like it was all okay. It was all okay. And people actually didn't even question her. She was worried that she was going to get a lot of like negative feedback about it. But
Yeah.
she didn't. And she felt a lot better setting that boundary, not doing so much extra work. So it was good.
I was just going to say, I'm like, this all sounds like boundary setting,
Yeah.
right? And boundary setting, I think, is so critical, regardless of whether you're experiencing burnout or not. In fact, it's probably a really good way of preventing burnout in the first place, right? Um, so I think that's really interesting. We have a comment, and I thought this was
Mhm.
interesting, right? So one of our audience members says, they don't think the place exists where you can avoid workplace burnout, and I agree. Um, and then this person also shares that there needs to be more meaningful discussions around how corporations treat their employees, meaning treating them as actual human beings. And I do think that that is worthy of a conversation. I think to my earlier point about leadership, there are some disconnects taking place, and the people that are bearing the brunt of it are most of us, right?
Mhm.
It's a select group of people who are making these decisions for a lot of us. So, and I do recognize that not everyone has the ability to go and work for themselves. I absolutely recognize that. But I think that when your job is the problem, there are ways to prepare yourself to make a move. For example, when I was experiencing burnout, I wrote the list of what I'm looking for. So I knew I had boundaries. I had set up healthy boundaries right away. So I knew when I was evaluating jobs that I wouldn't choose something that I knew was going to be wrong for me from the get-go. So I had some of those things in place, and I routinely review them. Am I still living true to what my vision is for my life? And I think that's an important practice for people to do, is constantly evaluating, where are you at, or how are you feeling about your current job? And if you're not feeling great about it, then what you need to do, you can do some tactical things, right? We're talking about some self-care, or drawing on resources around you to take care of your mental health. But one thing we haven't touched on is there are also other tangible ways of preparing or preventing workplace burnout. And that is just preparing your career marketing materials, having them up to date. That takes a lot of pressure off. So, when I left, I wasn't ready. I walked out, basically. I didn't have a job lined up. My marriage was falling apart. So I had actually screwed myself even further than I was. My whole reason for staying at work was because I needed the job, but it got so bad that I had to quit my job anyway. So I actually pulled myself backwards. So don't be like me. Gosh, I really need to find a different example than myself. I'm not looking, this is not looking good. This was years ago, people, years and years and years and years ago. But having some of those materials prepared, having a solid LinkedIn profile, keeping your resume up to date every 6 months. It's not a big deal. Keep what I call like a brag file, or kudos file, whatever you want to call it, so that it's really easy to update. But a lot of times, just knowing that you're prepared, maybe that you have some money saved up, that your resume is ready to go, that you've been networking actively over the past year. And if you do fall, or you need to step back because things have become untenable, then you have at least reduced the stress of having to come up with all of those resources spur of the moment and be in panic mode. I was able to secure a job because I am, even in my funk, I am a great networker. And so I landed a job being recruited by someone I had worked with formerly. But that's not always the case. And it hasn't always been easy to find a job. But it goes to my earlier point about the more you can do to bolster yourself from a career advancement or career management perspective, the less you have in terms of stress when things do go awry and you have to evaluate some other options. So I just don't want to make it sound like my way is the only way of doing things. There are lots of different ways, but I'm really just sharing it because I hate for other people to fall into the trap that I fell into. And it took, takes months to lose the weight. It takes months of therapy to feel more like yourself and build your confidence back up. It can take months to find a new job. So, having these resources at your disposal hopefully will make it a little easier for you to combat those things in the future. When would you say, in your opinion, should someone involve a professional, a therapist, someone that they hire to really help them work through maybe some of these more foundational things that might be at play?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think there's any time where I would say, it's too early to do that, or you shouldn't do that. Like, anytime that you feel like you might want to do that, I think is a good time. But I think that you absolutely need to, if your emotional or mental health symptoms are getting in the way of your daily life, right? That's kind of the bar that therapists and mental health professionals will use to evaluate whether something is something needs treatment, really.
Yeah.
So if you notice that your inability to set boundaries is getting in the way of your life, just even in that it's driving the burnout, right? Or your anger is getting in the way of your daily life, that's really when it's imperative that you get some help. So it would be great if you did it before that, but that's the
Right.
line where you really need to, right? Because then it starts to get out of hand.
Well, and that's the thing. A lot of us are like, oh, I'll just, it'll be okay. I can hang in there a little bit longer, or something's going to change, and then it'll all be all right. And it is very easy. And like I said earlier, the further down you slide, this is for me personally, when I experience depression, it's like, if I don't catch myself here and get help, or reach out, then I end up here, and it takes that much longer to get back to my baseline. And
Yes.
so I think it is, once you start feeling those things, even asking a friend, have you noticed anything different? I'm kind of
Mhm.
feeling not great about work, but I'm not sure how bad things are. Have you noticed anything different? Or your spouse, whomever you might surround or spend your time with, to see what they think too, because oftentimes people recognize things before we even do ourselves.
Yep.
So another reason to surround yourself with good people who care about you is that they're looking out for your best interest as well, and can help you identify some of those things faster, so you can
Yeah.
address them.
And not to be a downer on the whole situation, but just to throw in there something that I think doesn't get said enough. And this is something
Mm,
that when I was in training as a therapist, the psychiatrist that I worked under would say this a lot. And she would say mental health conditions in general, but I will just say depression, because that's something that is really relevant here.
yeah,
Depression is potentially a deadly disorder, right?
yeah,
People die of suicide that is
yep,
driven by depression. So it really is important to get mental health treatment if you're going down that road. There's a whole stigma around mental health
yeah,
treatment. That needs to stop. It is a deadly disorder, and we need to be able to treat
agree.
it without the shame.
Yeah, agree. Therapy has helped me through a lot of things. I certainly pursued it after I left my job. When I realized, okay, I can't let this happen again, I pursued it, and I still continue to get therapy, because having someone who can ask you good questions to help you reflect on things and really kind of get to the root of what's causing you to behave certain ways, or to make certain decisions, or things that cause stress, is really valuable. I think it's one of those things that is it contributes to a healthy life in general. However, I know that that's not always accessible to everyone. So I think the next best thing, and let me know what you think. There are a lot of people who find themselves in situations where their insurance doesn't cover mental health care, or they can't afford it. Maybe they're already out of a job, and they'd experienced workplace burnout, and they can't afford it. I mean, my next best piece would be, talk to a trusted friend,
Mhm.
maybe even someone who's been through it before, family members. Find someone that you feel comfortable sharing with those things, and make sure that, that they're aware, so that you have someone else who's looking out for you too. What would you add to that? Like, what can people do if therapy is not an option? What's the next best thing?
Yeah, I mean, so I want to point out the importance of medication to treat depression. So if you do have any access to healthcare, like a primary care provider, a community mental health center, like different things like that do exist, and those options might be available. Um, but yes, talking to a friend, going to a support group. There are meetups around this kind of thing as well. So there are free resources out there for folks where you just don't have to feel as alone. The other thing is, I had a post the other day that was from an article which I think was in Fast Company. I'm not sure exactly.
Mhm.
Um, and it was a study that said talking to anyone about anything, like you just chat with somebody in the grocery store line, can
Mhm.
make you significantly happier. So one of the things that people tend to do when they're feeling low is they isolate, right? They just sit at
Yeah.
home. I think somebody said in here they go catatonic in bed and listen to Radiohead, right? Like it's a very common thing to do when you're feeling low, is you just want to like be alone and isolate yourself.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of what you should do. You should get out and talk to people. It doesn't matter who, it doesn't matter about what. just being out in the world can make you feel better.
I find that, and this sounds super cheesy, but even if I'm kind of in a crummy mood, but I'm out in public, like if I make myself smile at someone or I smile back at someone, I do feel a little bit better. Does it solve the problem? No, but I mean, shit, you got to take any win you can. And frankly, when you make connections with other people, especially to exchange a smile or something pleasant, then I think it really can make a big difference in your mood. So I think, yes, to your point, getting out, forcing you to do things. For me, it was also putting a calendar invite on my calendar recurred to work out. And it's still there. This is just part of my schedule. You will go do this. I mean, there are times you can't do it. But I find that putting some structure in place about what you're going to do and holding yourself accountable can be helpful. And if you can't, then ask a friend or a coworker, say, hey, I know I've got to get out of this office at least once a day. Can we put on a recurring invite where we go and take a 10-minute walk 3 times a week or once a week? Even things like that, I think that was what saved me was getting out of the office. And unfortunately, for a long time, I was a smoker. So it was like, oh, I'll go have a cigarette. This is my escape. Now it's like, I need to find healthier ways. So it's taking walks or, taking my dog out and throwing the ball for, whatever it is, something to get out of the house and engage with other people or shoot, dogs, any animal of any kind of really will pretty much cheer me up. So that usually does it. But yeah, when when things get serious, and I've certainly been to the point where I needed to get professional help is really critical. And, to your earlier point, there are places where there's sliding scales, and financial help. And I think that even a support group can be really helpful. I've joined some private Facebook groups in the past for, divorced moms or single parents and things like that. And I found those communities to be really supportive and in a safe place to not only share, but also to read other people's stories and know I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that's going through this thing. So I would second the group therapy as a great solution. For those of you who are just joining or recently did, Jessica has prepared this really wonderful burnout recovery kit that gives you kind of some self-diagnosis resources, as well as some ideas of how to alleviate symptoms, of burnout. And that URL, that link is on the banner here up on the screen. So definitely make sure that you download that resources. I've already looked at it and it's great. I really wish I had it years ago when I was really experiencing some severe burnout. So take advantage of that resource. Let's see, what else haven't we covered? What else do people know about workplace burnout? If you guys have questions, feel free to throw them in the comments. Otherwise, we may wrap up a few minutes early. I just want to give you guys the opportunity to pick our brains, and particularly Jessica's. While she's here, we have, a therapist and career coach who's here who on the daily supports folks like you who are going through or experiencing workplace burnout. So throw your questions. And I think one thing to mention, Jessica, is, hang on, let me throw our slides back up here for a hot minute because I have our contact information. So if you've joined us today and you don't want to ask a question, you're uncomfortable sharing, that's okay. We totally understand. You are more than welcome to connect with us on LinkedIn or to reach out to us via our website or email. I've got both of our contact information on the slide, so don't hesitate to reach out. I will share, I'll put it up here for a hot minute. I'm happy to share 30 minutes of my time. If you have gotten to the point where you're burned out, this job is not going to work for me anymore. I need to start my journey of looking for a new position. Put 30 minutes on my calendar. If you're serious about looking at other options, whether it's a career transition or a shift into another industry, I would be happy to have a conversation. Jessica's information is also posted. If you want to ask her a question or you want to get on her calendar, I think that's the best way to do it, is contacting you via LinkedIn. What's your preferred way?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. Also, my email is jessica@wishingwellcoach.com. That's great too. But yeah, absolutely. I would be thrilled to connect with anyone.
Brilliant. Okay. Anything else that we should share with the group? I think we've covered quite a bit, but I just want to make sure that if we've missed anything that we address it here at the end. You've been such a great guest. I'm so grateful that you chose to share your time today with me and with everyone who's joined us today. I really appreciate you a lot. And this has been a really nice way to end my week. So I appreciate that very much. Is there anything you'd like to share that you think everyone needs to know before we wrap up today?
Well, I mean, I think just to really take in that if you're in this spot, you are definitely not alone. I mean, the statistics, I think, absolutely show that. But to really kind of emotionally take that in, you're not alone. There is help, and you don't have to feel like this forever. So there are better workplaces out there, workplaces that are better for you, and that can be figured out. So you don't have to suffer with this.
I will say that when I left that job that I was burned out from, the next position that I took, I had a great schedule. I was able to work remote where I'd been in the office before. I had the kindest manager. And I was so grateful. So that is to all that to say, there is hope. There is something out there that is better for you. It may take some time, but it is absolutely worth the effort. I think both you and I could attest that when you find work that's meaningful in an environment that's safe and healthy, that life becomes much more enjoyable on the daily because work impacts our daily lives so much in our relationships. So I think it is really important, an important topic that we brought up today. They're
Yeah.
talking about. So, all right, everyone. Well, that wraps up this month's Ask Kate Anything. I'm super excited to announce that next month on Friday, June 23rd, Brenda Cunningham will be joining me to talk about divorce disruption, how to shift your career when shit hits the fan. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. She and I are both divorced mothers, so we're going to share a little bit about our personal experiences. And how you can transition in a new job or a new industry or a new career altogether, in spite of going through what could be a really difficult time. And frankly, it doesn't have to be divorce. It could be any major life event that is impacting your ability to grow professionally in your career. So I welcome you to keep an eye out for the details of that event. I've got it posted on my LinkedIn profile, so you can get the link there, or of course, reach out to me. Jessica, I just want to again extend a big thank you to you for joining today and sharing all this wonderful wisdom and support with our audience. I wish you a very happy weekend. And I hope everyone out there has a wonderful Friday afternoon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kate.